I have an in-depth, advanced 1-hour grammar lesson for you in which we are going to cover a variety of topics. Prepositions of place, could've, should've, would've. I have a challenging quiz for you and much more. I've taken some of my best advanced grammar lessons and put them together in this one video lesson. And if you are someone who enjoys improving your grammar skills, please subscribe, turn on notifications. That way I can become your teacher. My name is Wes. The channel is Interactive English. It's all about trying to help you reach your fluency goals. So without further ado, let's begin with prepositions. Which preposition should we use to complete this sentence? In, on, or at? Actually, you could use any of them. All of them are correct. It really just depends on the context. And that's what I want to do in today's lesson. I want to break it down for you so that you easily understand how to use each of these prepositions when talking about place. And I'm also going to give you a little bit of a mini quiz at the end to see how much you've learned. Also, if you'd like to get a PDF copy of today's lesson, just click on the link down below in the description. So let's begin with in. And when you're thinking about in, think about an enclosed space that you are surrounded on all sides. And I want to give you some, well, general ideas as to when you would use this preposition. So you will use in to talk about locations within a larger area. How many people live in this town? You'll use in with a car, taxi, or van. If I were to say, hey, we're waiting in the car. It's used to talk about workplaces or industries. If someone asks, where do you work? I work in human resources, or I work in fashion. And if you've seen many of my video lessons, you know I absolutely do not work in fashion. It's my fashion's pretty bad. You would use in with water. Let's all get in the pool, or the expression, there's plenty of fish in the sea. So again, we're talking about the sea, we're talking about water, and you would use this expression to say that, well, if somebody's single and they're looking to have a relationship and find a partner, you're saying this to encourage them to keep looking, that there's somebody out there for them. Don't give up hope. There's plenty of fish in the sea. We use this preposition with class. I'm having trouble paying attention in class. I'm enclosed in this space. And we also use it with printed materials. If you don't know the meaning of a word, you can look it up in the dictionary. And you can think about it that, well, that word, it's surrounded by other pages. So it's in the dictionary. So just keep these in mind when you're thinking about in. And now let's talk about on, and when you will use this preposition. And when it comes to on, I want you to think about a surface, that something is attached to or touching something else. So we use on to refer to the position of something on any surface. Your coffee is on the table. I found some money on the sidewalk. It's used to talk about a floor in a building. I work on the 7th floor. It also describes the position along a road or river or by the sea or a lake. I could say the car is on the road. The boat is on the river. Again, it's on that surface. Or I could even say I grew up on the East Coast. So I'm talking about the coast where I grew up on that surface, and I would say on the East Coast. So when you're talking about the coast, east, west, use on. Now the next few are technically not on the surface, but I still want you to use on. So we're going to use it when talking about being on public transit, like a bus or a plane. I'm on a bus heading downtown, or I'm on a plane to Chicago. And I know this can be a little tricky because we use in with a car, like you're surrounded, you're enclosed. So one way to think about it is that you're going to use in with smaller vehicles, and you'll use on with larger modes of transportation. But again, there's always exceptions because you're still going to use on with a bike or motorcycle, on a bike or on a motorcycle. We use the preposition on with left or right. My house is on the left. Oh, no, sorry, it's on the right. And we'll use this preposition with media as well. Did you see the new show on Netflix? or you may be watching this lesson on YouTube. So just keep all of this in mind when it comes to using on. So now let's talk about at and when to use this preposition. And when you think about at, I want you to think of a point, a specific location or position. So of course we're going to use at when we're referring to the position or location as a point. I could say there's a package at the front door. We use it to refer to an address. I live at 44 Main Street. And this can be a little confusing because if we're just talking about the street, then we'll use on. I live on Main Street, on that surface. But if I give the specific location, 44 Main Street, well, now we're talking about a point, so we're going to use at. We use this preposition to refer to most shops or public places. And in this case, I want you to think about a larger point. So I could say I'm shopping at the mall. And you would use at even if you are in the mall, because if somebody were to ask you like, hey, where are you? They're typically asking about your location. So that's why you would use at and say, I'm shopping at the mall. We use it to refer to group activities. I could ask you, how many people were at your party? We also use it with school or university. I studied at a top-notch university. And that's not really true. I studied at a party school, but you get the point. With either of those, we're going to use at. And we use this preposition with work or home. I could really say that right now I'm working at home. So this should give you a better idea as to when you would use at. Now let's go back to our original sentence, and I told you that all three prepositions are correct. It really just depends on the context. So if I say I'm in the lake, well, that just means that I'm physically in the water. I'm surrounded by the water. If I were to say I'm on the lake, well, now I'm talking about the surface. So it really implies that I'm probably on a boat and I'm out on the water and I'm on the lake. And if I were to say I'm at the lake, well, now I'm talking about a specific location, even though it's a larger area. If somebody were to ask, where are you? Then I would say I'm at the lake, because we're talking about location. And right now, I want to test your knowledge. I have a little mini quiz for you. I'm going to give you a sentence, and I want you to think, well, which preposition best completes it? In, on, or at? I'll give you a moment to think about it, and then I'll tell you the answer. So your first sentence is, I found a mistake, the first page. Which preposition would you use? The answer is on. So in this case, we're talking about the surface of the page, on the first page. I found a mistake on the first page. So just keep this in mind. If we're talking about a page, we're going to use on. And that is a little tricky because remember, we're going to use in when talking about printed materials like a book. So something is on a page, but in a book. Here's your next sentence. She felt proud, the end of her month-long journey. What do you think? The correct answer is at. She felt proud at the end of her month-long journey because we're talking about that point, that location. She's at the end of her journey. And these are really common phrases with at if we're talking about, well, at the beginning of something or at the end of something. Then there's this sentence, there are no public toilets, the city center. The correct answer is in. There are no public toilets in the city center. We're going to use in because we're talking about a location within a larger area. Here's a question for you. Do you have anything? Your pockets. I think you know this. The correct answer is in. Do you have anything in your pockets? We're talking about an enclosed area. Here's another one. We wanted to sit the front of the plane. I'm trying to trick you a little bit, but the correct answer is at. We wanted to sit at the front of the plane. I told you that with public transit, you're going to use on a plane, but in this case, we're talking about a specific location on a plane. So in that case, we're going to use at. at the front of the plane. How about this one? Please refer to the graph, the slide. The correct answer is on. Please refer to the graph on the slide. So once again, we're talking about the surface of something on a page, on a slide. So how'd you do on the quiz? I want you to be honest. Let me know down in the comments because I just love hearing from you. I should have joined the interactive English community. Or I could have joined the interactive English community, or I would have joined the interactive English community. So today I want to talk to you about these modals: should have, could have, and would have. And they're often referred to as modals of lost opportunity because we use them to describe situations that we imagine are different. Now, the good news is that you have not lost this opportunity if you would like to join the interactive English community. There is a link down in the description. It is a great way for you and me to keep in touch. But let's get back to these modals because I want to make sure that you are using them correctly. And I think this is very useful because quite often we want to describe our feelings about past decisions. So you're going to use should have when something did not happen, but you wish that it did happen. You'll use could have when something was possible, but it did not happen. And you will use would have when something happened, but you're just imagining a different result. Now, before we just dive right into these modals, I want to talk to you about pronunciation and grammar, because with pronunciation, these modals will often get reduced. So what's happening is that the H in have, it's just going to get removed. And then that vowel sound is going to become more of a schwa. So we're left with of. And then the final D, that consonant sound, will get linked with that schwa. So it's like we have should of, could of, would of. All right, it's linked together. And people may even reduce it further if they're speaking really fast and they're going to drop that V and you just hear the schwa. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. But in general, I think it's often you're going to hear these modals get reduced. And you can listen to me as the lesson goes on. I will reduce them. The other thing I want to say when it comes to grammar is that with these modals, you're going to follow them with the past participle. So with regular verbs, you're just going to use that ed. Should have played, could have called, would have walked. With irregular verbs, you just need to know the past participle. Should have won, could have broken, would have bought. Now that we got grammar and pronunciation out of the way, let me give you a little more context with each of these modals, and we'll begin with should have. So when you think of should have, think of regret. I told you that something did not happen, but you wish that it did happen. So perhaps you're thinking about a past decision and somebody had a good idea or a recommendation and you did not listen to it and you lost that opportunity. When talking about that situation, we can then use should have. So I'm constantly asking you to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. So let's just imagine that you don't do this. And then in the future, you're going to look back at this situation and you might say, I should have listened to Wes. My name's Wes, by the way, in case this is your first time here. You'd say, I really want to practice and improve my English skills. Therefore, I should have subscribed to the channel and turned on notifications. Now, if you want to use should have in the negative, should not have, in that case, it's like you regret something that was wrong. I should not have yelled at my brother. I should not have cheated on the exam. I should not have eaten that. And that's one that I feel like I probably use from time to time. Yes, I should not have eaten that. Bad decision. Now let's move on to could have. And with this modal, I want you to think of possibility. That's the one word I want you to keep in mind. Possibility. I told you that with this modal, something was possible, but it did not happen. I was so tired, I could have stayed in bed all day. It did not happen, but it was possible. And I know that I give you a lot of examples, so today I have a special guest The famous Marlon Brando is going to give you the next example.
You was my brother, Charlie. You should have looked out for me a little bit.
Oh, excellent, Marlon. A little bit of review with should have. So you should have looked out for me. Again, something that did not happen, but he wishes that it did happen. Now, I will make a quick little grammar correction. You would not say you was. Instead, you're going to use you were. But that's okay. Let's just focus on these modals. So please continue.
You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody instead of a bum.
So at this moment, he feels like a bum. But those other things were possible. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody. And what he's referring to is boxing. He was a prize fighter. I could have been a contender. And then if we want to use the negative, could not have, in that case, we're just saying the opposite and saying that something was impossible. So before I said I was so tired, I could have stayed in bed all day. That's talking about something that was possible. If I change that sentence around and said, I had so much work to do, I could not have stayed in bed all day. Now I'm talking about something impossible. I could not have stayed in bed because I had so much work. And then there's would've. And with would've, the word that I want you to remember and keep in mind is different. Because when you use would've, it's like something happened, but you are imagining a different result. Something different from the real situation. And often you are going to use this modal with that third conditional, those if statements. So I could say the team would have won the championship if their best player had not gotten injured. So in this case, I'm imagining that different result, because the real situation is that the best player was injured and the team did not win the championship. I want to make a quick distinction between could have and would have, because it's possible for you to use could have in that sentence. The team could have won the championship. But again, in that case, we're talking about a possibility. If I say the team would have won the championship, now it's more certain, and that is the result that I'm imagining. So it's really a difference between possibility and certainty, could have and would have. You can also use would have to show that you wanted to do something, but you were not able to. I would have given you a ride, but my car broke down. And once again, I could use the third conditional to say the same thing, same meaning. I would have given you a ride if my car had not broken down. Now, using it in the negative, would not have, you're still imagining a different result. But instead of imagining a result that would have happened, you're imagining that your real situation would not have happened if some other things occurred. I would not have finished the project without your help. So the real situation is that I did finish the project and I'm just imagining a different result. Or if I had not been stuck in traffic, I would not have been late for work. So it can be a little tricky to wrap your head around some of these examples. Just know that with would have, you're imagining a different result. Now, something you may not have known about these modals is that you can use them together as an idiom. Should have, could have, would have. Mostly people would use this in spoken English, and they are going to reduce these modals. Should have, could have, would have, or they would reduce it more and say shoulda, coulda, woulda. So what this means is that you are dismissing someone else's regret or worry about a past action or some lost opportunity, and you're just dismissing that. So it's kind of a cold response and it's just unsympathetic. So let's say that we work together and you're a little upset with me because I made you do more work, and I'm telling you, like, yeah, maybe I should have worked harder so that you did not have to do my work for me. And you're a little annoyed, you're a little upset, and you would say, yeah, shoulda, coulda, woulda. It's already done. It's too late. I've already did your work. And then I could keep going and say, I know that you did that extra work and I would have offered to help, but I was stuck in traffic. And once again, you could dismiss my regret and say, shoulda, coulda, woulda. I don't care about your excuse. I'm still angry. Should have, could have, would have. All right. You can't change the past. So that idiom is a fun way to wrap up the lesson. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you have a better understanding of these modals. Should have, could have, and would have. Let's talk about the difference between used to and used to. Now, they can be a little confusing, not necessarily when speaking, but when trying to determine, well, which one you should use in writing. And I say they're not really confused when speaking because the pronunciation is the same, and I will come back to that a little bit later on. But for right now, let's focus on used to, because this is definitely the most common one that you are going to use when speaking or writing. And I think, well, used to alone can be confusing because, well, dictionaries may look at it different ways. Cambridge has used to as a modal verb. Merriam-Webster says that used to is an adjective as well as a verb. Macmillan Dictionary has used to as a modal verb. Oxford Learner's Dictionary also says that used to is a modal verb, and dictionary.com has it as an adjective as well as a verb. Let's first make a distinction between used to as a modal verb or verb and used to as an adjective. Now, the grammar is different, the part of speech, but also the meaning is different. So right now, let's get rid of the adjective, forget about the adjective. Let's just focus on used to as a verb or modal verb. And I keep saying verb, modal verb, as you saw some of the dictionaries have it listed differently. And that is because in some ways, used to acts like a modal verb, and in other ways, it really doesn't. But whether or not used to is considered a verb or a modal verb, the meaning's the same, and let's talk about the meaning because that is very important. And what this means is it's talking about something that was repeatedly done in the past, or even a situation that existed in the past, but the thing is not done anymore, or the situation does not exist anymore today in the present. So we'll give you some examples talking about myself. I could say, I used to live in South Korea. That is true. That is a situation that existed in the past. And when I lived in South Korea, I used to run around this lake twice a week. Bamun Lake, I used to run around it twice a week, and that is something that I had done repeatedly, except for the winter. In the winter, it was a bit too cold, so during those months, I used to sit on my ass. I could say that. Sometimes, not always. In those sentences, used to is a modal verb. It is a helping verb, and I already told you that it has some similarities to modal verbs, like it has one form, it's not conjugated. So I said, I used to live in South Korea. If I change the subject to he, it's not going to change. He used to live in South Korea. But used to, it can act differently from your average modal verb. For example, with modal verbs, you're not going to follow it with to. So I can say something like, I can swim, or it will rain, or you should write to me in the comments. I just love hearing from you. You should write to me in the comments. Now, with all of those sentences, we have the modal verb, and then we follow it with the infinitive, the base verb. There is no to. An exception is used to. I used to run around the lake, and, well, even if I wanted to change the subject and talk about myself in the third person to show that the form is not going to change, I could say, in winter, Wes used to sit around on his ass, but sometimes. All right, so to is going to come before the base verb, and that's why I think if you're trying to think about it, I think it's best to consider used to as just one phrase. Try to think about it together as one phrase, used to. Questions and negative statements also make used to different from other modal verbs, because if we're talking about questions, typically we can just use the modal verb to create a question. Can he swim? Will it rain? And if we're talking about negative statements, then you're just going to use not with a typical modal verb. He cannot swim, or it won't rain. But this is not the case with used to. Of course, used to, it just has to be different than all the other modal verbs. And I think this is also when people might say, okay, it acts more like a verb, because if we're talking about questions, used to, it refers to the past. So with questions, you're going to use did, and if you're going to make a negative statement, then you're going to use did not. So if we're going to use it as a question, I could ask you, did you used to study English? And if I want to say a negative statement, then I could say, well, I didn't used to have hair like this. And that's because I used to shave my head. But more importantly than my shaved head is that you now see that used to has changed. The spelling has changed to used to. And this is what I want you to remember. If we're talking about questions and negative statements, you are going to use used to, and you're going to spell it U-S-E. I told you that the only distinction is in writing because, well, the pronunciation's the same. Whether you're saying used to or used to, it's the same pronunciation. The D and the T, they blend together to create one sound. So yeah, the pronunciation, it's really the same. Nobody's gonna know if you end up making a mistake, because you're still just going to say used to or used to. And now that you have a perfect understanding of used to being used as a modal verb / verb, let's now talk about used to being used as an adjective. So the first thing that I want to tell you is the meaning. I told you that the meaning is different, and what this means is that, well, it's referring to something that you are familiar with or that you are accustomed to. And it often follows the verb to be. So I could say, well, I am used to hot weather. All right, it's just something that I'm used to. I'm not used to cold weather. It's just something I'm not that familiar with. And in this case, because used to is an adjective, it's not going to change whether we're talking about questions or negative statements. You are always going to spell used to like this, U-S-E-D. Another thing that I want to tell you about used to as an adjective, just giving you another example, I do not think any of us were used to staying inside for so long during the pandemic. And I think that's true. I think we can all relate to that sentence. And the thing that I wanted to point out with this sentence is that you may often follow used to with a gerund, and you're used to doing something. Like, I'm used to taking the bus in the morning, or I'm not used to working late. But even though we were not used to staying inside during the pandemic, we had to get used to it. And I just gave you an example right there of it being used with another verb that is not the verb to be. And that, I think, is also, it's a common usage to get used to doing something, or even people using it as an imperative statement, giving a command and you're telling somebody, get used to it. But just remember, used to as an adjective has a different meaning than used to as a modal verb or verb. That's the one thing that I really want you to remember from this lesson. And yes, it's confusing, but I think over time, the more you listen, the more you practice, you're just going to get used to it. I have studied English. I have been studying English. Are these sentences the same or are they different? Let's find out. I want to help you improve your grammar because I want to talk about the difference between two verb tenses, the present perfect tense and the present perfect continuous. And these two verb tenses can confuse many English learners who may not be sure about how and when to use them, as well as if there are any differences between these two tenses. So before we talk about the differences between these two tenses, I want to focus on how and when we use them. And let's first begin with the present perfect tense, which on its own can be very confusing because there are many languages that do not even have a present perfect tense. So I want to first begin with how you're going to form the present perfect. You're going to have a helping verb and a main verb. The helping verb is going to be have, and the main verb is going to be the past participle. And we often use the present perfect to talk about a finished action in the past at an unspecified time. We don't know when it's happened, and it may have happened once or even more than once. So let's look at this sentence right here. I've been to China. There I am right there. Again, we have the helping verb have plus the past participle, been. It is the past participle of the verb to be. And you know that this happened in the past. It's finished, but you don't know when. It's an unspecified time. I've been to China, or I could say, well, I've been to Barcelona twice. This happened in the past. We don't know when, but we know that it happened more than once. There were 2 different trips to Barcelona. One thing that I want to say about the present perfect tense is that when you use it, the result is really what matters. It's like you're more interested in the result than the action. And I will come back to this when I talk to you about the present perfect continuous. So let's think of this situation right here. I'll use a question and say, have you hit the like button? All right, this is a question in the present perfect. The helping verb have, the past participle hit, that's our main verb. Have you hit the like button? And again, I'm really more interested in that result, and I really am. And I hope you would say, yes, I have hit the like button. It happened in the past, sometime between when the video started and right now. And if you have, let me know. Write that to me in the comments. Just say, yes, I have hit the like button. Practice writing using the present perfect. And then I will tell you that you are awesome. All right. So with all of those examples that I just gave you, we were talking about finished actions in the past. So let's now move to the present perfect continuous, and let's look at how this verb tense is formed. Again, we're going to use the helping verb have plus the past participle of the verb to be, which is been. Have been plus our main verb with an ing at the end. All right, so in this case, it's like we have 2 helping verbs, have been, and then the main verb. And we use the present perfect continuous to talk about an unfinished action that started in the past. It has continued to right now, which is the present, and then it will likely continue into the future. So I could say, well, even like right now, I've been teaching this lesson. It's an unfinished action. It started in the past, it has continued until right now, and it's going to continue into the future, and I hope you keep watching. Now, one thing that I will say about the present perfect continuous is that when you use this verb tense, the focus is more on the action because something is continuing. So with the present perfect tense, the focus is on the result. With the present perfect continuous, the focus is more on the action. One thing that I want to remind you of, and the reason why I'm so close is because I want you to remember this, is that there are many non-action verbs that you should not use in the continuous tense. And I'm putting a list of these verbs up here right now. So you should not use these verbs with the present perfect continuous, but again, with English, the people are always breaking these rules, especially in spoken English. But just to give you an example, if I give you in a sentence like, oh, I have an iPhone, I'm talking about ownership, possession. I could use it in the present perfect tense and say, yeah, I've had an iPhone for a long time. It's an iPhone 6, so it's pretty old. But I could not use it in the continuous tense and say, I've been having an iPhone. That just sounds awkward, so just keep that in mind. There are many non-action verbs that you should just avoid using in the continuous tense. So now let's look at some differences between the present perfect tense and the present perfect continuous. And I want to make some quick comparisons so you can see a clear difference between these 2 verb tenses, especially how the focus is different. So let's look at these 2 sentences right here. We have redecorated our home and we have been redecorating our home. The sentence in the present perfect, we have redecorated our home. It's talking about an action that started in the past and it's now finished. We don't know when it started, we don't know when it ended, but the focus is on that result, that yes, it's finished. The home, it has been redecorated. With the present perfect continuous, we're talking about an unfinished action. It started in the past and it's still going on right now. So the focus is on that action, that continuing action. Also, and this may help you know, well, when you should use the present perfect continuous. If we're talking about an unfinished action that started in the recent past, people may use this verb tense with the words recently or lately. So I could say, well, recently we've been redecorating our home, or lately we've been redecorating our home. That tells me that this action, it started in the recent past. It's a continuing action that's gone on till now. And yes, it's probably going to continue into the future. Here are another couple of sentences. I have thought about buying a new phone, or I've been thinking about buying a new phone. So with the present perfect, it suggests that, okay, I thought about this in the past, and then maybe I decided, well, no, not to buy a new phone. It's just something I thought about, and then I stopped thinking about it. And as you can see, I still have this old iPhone 6, and maybe I just made the decision not to buy one. If I use the present perfect continuous and say, well, I've been thinking about buying a new phone, that suggests that I have not made a decision, not yet. I'm still thinking about it, and maybe in the future, I'm going to make a decision and upgrade and get a new phone because, yes, this iPhone 6, it's pretty old. And then we get to these two sentences right here, the sentences that you have been waiting for this entire lesson. I have studied English versus I have been studying English. And the difference between these two sentences is nothing. Well, pretty much nothing, because they're interchangeable. You can use them, and they basically mean the same thing, because with both of these sentences, we're talking about an unfinished action. And I know this can be a bit confusing because you're probably thinking like, wait a second, Wes, you told us that the present perfect tense is used to talk about finished actions at an unspecified time in the past. Yes, that is true, but you can also use the present perfect tense to talk about an unfinished action that started in the past and it's gone on for a duration of time or since a point in time. And those are two key words that I really want you to remember and be aware of, because we often use the present perfect with those words, for and since. So I could say, I have studied English for 3 years, a duration of time, or I could say I've studied English since 2018. Both of those sentences mean the exact same thing. The only difference is for and since. I could also say this using the present perfect continuous. I've been studying English for 3 years, or I've been studying English since 2018. So if somebody were to ask you, how long have you been learning English? You could respond with any one of those sentences. It's really your pick. There's not much difference between them, but there is very slight difference, of course. I didn't want to disappoint you. I wanted to really get into details here, so I was saving it for the very end. And let's talk about those slight differences right now, which is going to help you kind of, well, not only improve your comprehension, but your overall fluency as well. So the good news is that when the present perfect and the present perfect continuous are basically interchangeable and they pretty much mean the same thing, we're only talking about a handful of verbs. We're talking about the verbs like teach, play, learn, study, and work. All right. So those are 5 verbs that when you're using either verb tense, they're fairly interchangeable and they mean the same thing. But again, there may be a slight difference in a certain context, situation. It may be more appropriate to use one over the other. So let's look at these sentences right here. We've lived in Budapest for 4 years, and we've been living in Budapest since 2017. So just looking at them, generally speaking, they're very similar. They're pretty much the same. You could use them interchangeably, but there may be a slight difference when talking about the permanent versus temporary. So let me give you a couple of other sentences that I think are probably a little easier to understand when I talk about the difference between permanent and temporary. So you're more likely to use the present perfect tense when talking about an unfinished action that's more permanent. And you're more likely to use the present perfect continuous when you're talking about an unfinished action that's perhaps temporary. So I could say, well, I've worked for the company for 25 years. I'm using the present perfect. It's unfinished because I still work for the company, and it's more permanent. It makes you think, well, I'm not looking for a job. I'm not going to change jobs. I'm just giving you this information. I've worked for the company for 25 years. If I say this, that, well, I usually work downtown, but I've been working at home ever since the pandemic started. In this case, I'm referring to an action that started in the past. It's unfinished because I'm still working at home, but it's only temporary. It makes you think that in the future, then perhaps I'm not going to be working at home anymore. I'm talking about a temporary situation. I've been working at home ever since the pandemic started. So hopefully that makes it a little easier to understand the difference when I say permanent versus temporary. And you could even apply this to other sentences that you may use interchangeably. So those two sentences that I told you a moment ago, we have lived in Budapest for 4 years, or we've been living in Budapest since 2017. In general, you could use either one. But again, if you use the present perfect, if I say we've lived in Budapest since 2017, then it's a more permanent situation. It might make you think, well, we're not currently looking to change the place that we live, that we're probably going to stay in Budapest. If I say it using the present perfect continuous, the focus is on that action, that we're still living here. It's unfinished, but it makes you think it may only be temporary because in the future, that's going to change. If the focus is on that action, in all likelihood, that action is going to change in the future, in which case we would, well, move somewhere else, and that this is only temporary. And if you were to ask me, I would say the second one. We've been living in Budapest since 2017 because this is probably not going to be our permanent home in the future. We will likely move somewhere else. So even though with those 5 verbs, work, play, live, teach, study, you can use these verb tenses interchangeably. You could read a little more information into it if you want to think about whether something is going to be more permanent or if something is temporary. Let's see how well you know your grammar. So I'm going to give you a question. I'll give you a moment to think of the answer, and then I will tell you the answer and explain why it is correct. So let's begin with our first question right here. If somebody were to say, whatever you do, don't leave me alone talking to Wes. He's so, Okay, how would you complete that sentence? Are you going to use A, bored, or B, boring? So I hope that you chose B, boring. That is the correct answer. He's so boring. So this can be a little confusing, the difference between ed and ing adjectives. In short, you're going to use ed adjectives to talk about the way you feel. You're going to use ing adjectives to describe a situation, a thing, or just a person's characteristic. In this case, we're talking about a characteristic of mine, that I'm boring. And this is just an example. Of course, I hope that you do not think that I am boring. I would rather you say that maybe I am amusing or interesting or charming. I would take any of those ing adjectives. Here's your next challenging question. If I had taken my medicine this morning, right now. Are you going to use A, I would have felt sick, or B, I wouldn't feel sick? So I said it's challenging and difficult because we're talking about a mixed conditional, which means the answer is B, I wouldn't feel sick. If I had taken my medicine this morning, I wouldn't feel sick right now. In this case, we're mixing the second and third conditional. So we have an imaginary condition because we're imagining a different past, which is the third conditional. If I had taken my medicine this morning, so I did not take it, and that leads us in to a hypothetical result in the present. I wouldn't feel sick right now. Another way to think about it is with these two statements right here. I didn't take my medicine this morning, therefore I feel sick right now. I'm saying the same thing with that mixed conditional. If I had taken my medicine this morning, I wouldn't feel sick right now. Here is your next question. I don't know. What are you going to say? Where I should go or where should I go? This is something I notice that many learners commonly confuse. So what we're talking about, that blank, is really a noun clause. which means the answer is A. I don't know where I should go. So a noun clause, it's a dependent clause that has a subject and a verb. And just know that quite often noun clauses are going to begin with words like that or how, or those WH words like who, what, when, why, or where. And then we have this question right here. The movie at 8 p.m. Or you could say the movie at 8 o'clock. How are you going to complete that sentence? Are you going to use A, will start, B, starts, or C, is starting? So for this one, I guarantee that you got the correct answer, and that is because all of them are correct. It's a little bit of a trick question. You could use will start to talk about things that will happen in the future. You could use starts, the present simple, to refer to scheduled events in the future. And you could also use is starting, the present continuous, when talking about future arrangements. Even though all are correct, it really just depends on the context when deciding which one you're going to use. So let me try to give you some context and tell you how my mind works as to how I would choose which one of these. So I think overwhelmingly, I am going to use the present simple and just say starts. If somebody were to ask me, hey, what time's the movie? I would say the movie starts at 8 o'clock. I would probably use is starting if I kind of want to emphasize and highlight the time. In that case, maybe I'm trying to say, well, okay, I want you to be there, all right? Don't be late. Just remember, the movie is starting at 8 o'clock. So when you use the present continuous, you're really referring to that point in time. So I'm really trying to make that clear. The movie's starting at 8 o'clock. And then, to be honest, I would probably use will start less frequently. I might use it if I'm thinking about maybe other things that are also going to happen in the future. If I were thinking to myself, well, I'll have to eat dinner before the movie, and then the movie will start at 8 o'clock. And after the movie, I'll have to go home because I have to work tomorrow. So hopefully that gives you a little more context as to when you might use these different answers. Here is your next question. I recommend that everyone watching this video, that like button, all right? Are you going to say hit that like button or hits that like button? So once again, this can be a bit tricky. The answer is A, hit. We're talking about the subjunctive mood, and we use this to talk about desires, wishes, or suggestions. Now, grammatically speaking, in that noun clause, that's right, we're talking about another noun clause that everyone watching this video hit that like button. In that noun clause, you're going to use the base verb when we're talking about the subjunctive mood. And this can be a little tricky if the subject is perhaps in the third person, like he, she, or it, or if we're talking about an indefinite pronoun like everyone. Now, in spoken English, people may not always follow this rule. So if I'm going to use the subjunctive mood, I could say something like, I wish I were faster. I wish I were taller. I wish I were living in a big, beautiful home along the coast overlooking the ocean. So in spoken English, you may hear somebody say, I wish I was taller. I wish I were taller. I wish I was taller. It can be confusing, but you will hear both in spoken English. Next, we have this question. I English for several months, and I plan to continue improving my language skills. Are you going to use A, have studied, or B, have been studying? So we're talking about the difference between the present perfect and the present perfect continuous. All right, I hope that you chose B, have been studying. I've been studying English for several months, and I plan to continue improving my language skills. So B, I think it's the correct answer. You could use A, but I think B is the better answer, and let me explain. So the present perfect and the present perfect continuous, it can be confusing because they are sometimes interchangeable, especially if we're talking about an unfinished action, which in this case we are. But you're going to use the present perfect continuous, more specifically, when you're talking about an action that started in the past It's continued to the present and then will likely continue into the future. And it's the second part of this sentence. And I plan to continue improving my language skills. That is why I say B, have been studying, is the better answer. Here's the next question. Making progress. We could not finish before the deadline. Are you going to use A, in spite of, or B, although? Okay, so I hope that you chose A, in spite of. In spite of making progress, we could not finish before the deadline. So both in spite of and although, they're referring to contrasting ideas. The only real difference is the way that you use them, and I'm talking about the structure of the sentence. After in spite of, we're going to use a noun, a gerund, which is that ing form, or a pronoun. After although, we're going to use a subject and a verb. So in our sentence, you have making, that is a gerund, so you're going to use in spite of making progress. Now, I could use although and say the same thing and use a subject and a verb, and I would say, although we made progress, we could not finish before the deadline. So just remember that in spite of making progress is a phrase, whereas although we made progress is a clause. They're really the same. It just depends on how you want to structure the sentence. Here's your next question, talking about prepositions. Last night we left New York City. It was a long flight, but we're really excited to see the Big Apple. Are you going to complete this sentence with to, from, or for? Which preposition completes this sentence? Last night we left New York City. So the answer is C, for. Last night we left for New York City. Now I know prepositions can be tricky, and the best thing you can do is just practice them like we're doing right now. So let me explain this. The second sentence, that is important. It was a long flight, but we're excited to see the Big Apple. That tells us that the destination is New York City. Therefore, we're not going to use from. And normally, if we're talking about a place, you would go to a place. But our verb is leave. You're not going to use to when the verb is leave. You're going to use for if you're talking about going to a destination. You leave for some place. Last night we left for New York City. Your next question. Did you invite to the party? Are you going to use A, who, or B, whom? The correct answer is B, whom. Whom did you invite to the party? I would say that A is also correct in spoken English, and I will talk about that in just a moment. But who and whom can be confusing, but think of it this way. You're going to use who when the unknown is referring to the subject, and you'll use whom when the unknown is referring to the object. So all we have to do is take our question and change it into a statement. And I could say, well, I invited him to the party, or I invited her to the party. Him and her, those are objects. So in that case, I'm going to use whom. Whom did you invite to the party? Now, I said that A is correct in spoken English because, well, yeah, people just don't follow the rules. I think it's quite common in places like the United States, which is where I'm from. Most people will use who instead of whom. And I am somebody who also does this. If I were to ask this question, I would just say, who did you invite to the party? So just keep that in mind, that this is another one of those rules in spoken English that people will tend to break. Who versus whom. Here is another question. I bought a gift for my little girl. It's this little stuffed puppy right here. I hope she enjoys gift. Are you going to use A, the, or no article? Which one? I hope that you chose B, the. I hope she enjoys the gift. That is the correct answer. So really what we're talking about is the rule of first mention. And what this rule says is that the first time you mention a singular noun, you're going to use the indefinite article a or an. And the second time that you mention that same noun, you're going to use the definite article the, because it is now known. So this is a very useful and important rule to follow if you are writing a story or telling a story, because you want to make sure you get those articles correct. I hope that you enjoyed the gift of this grammar lesson, and if you did, then you can give me a gift. And that is the gift of writing to me in the comments, because I just love hearing from you. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. So long.